There comes a point in your career when you have to make a decision. Do you go back to the embryonic stages and join a startup and announce something new and trendy into the world? Do you perhaps go into a small to medium enterprise and sharpen your tool and perfect your craft a little bit more? Or do you find reason and meaning, rhyme, rhythm, reason and meaning within a large enterprise firm and carve out a room of your own? You have to make certain decisions, especially if you're in the space of technology, especially more in cybersecurity, about where you're going to find your reason, where you're going to find your rhyme. But a mentor of mine once told me is that, Ali, we often spend a lot of time drawing lines around us and figuring out a sandbox to play in. We often draw borders and lines when we should actually be looking to cross them. Actually, we should not just be thinking outside of the box. You've heard me say this before. We should burn the box completely. My guest today is someone who comes from a firm that is in no need of an introduction. A firm that I dare say actually introduced us and the world to technology to begin with. Not only is she someone who has thought outside of the box and burnt it in many cases, she's somebody who has taught us to look at the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. Know what you do not know, and has excelled in a space and now is a formidable leader in the world of cybersecurity. Someone who is well thought, well read, well traveled, and somebody who is definitely well achieved in this space. From IBM, she's not only the security intelligence lead, she was also nominated as one of Canada's top 20 women in cybersecurity. And with that, please join me in welcoming Daina Proctor to the Power Hour. Daina, welcome to the Power Hour.
Thank you, Ali. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here with you today.
Fantastic. And to our audience, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us from. It's extremely exciting to have Daina on this show today. I know we've got guests from around the world, and today we're going to go down a very fascinating journey where we're going to learn a little bit about Daina, as we always do during our power hours, and then point at specific use cases and examples where her thought leadership and her understanding of IBM's technologies has allowed different companies to advance securely in their businesses. Daina, one of the things that I always tell my team is that successful individuals are not just individuals who study the world, they look to change it. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey, your academic journey, and your journey that brought you to IBM? What did you study and what inspired you to drive some of the change that you're driving today? Daina?
Oh, wow. So that's a fantastic question. What brought me to here? So a little bit of a long sordid story, but looking back with my seasoned years and maybe some hindsight, I think I was always destined, right? I didn't know what I could be. Today's the role that I play today, the role I played yesterday didn't exist when I went through school. It didn't exist when I was in high school. I took the one and only computer science class offered in my high school. I actually started university in commerce, but very quickly realized that I wanted to take electives in computer science. And I quickly received a internship and stayed on as a role with EDS. EDS was a consulting firm where I was able to actually train on Novell networks. And I actually became a Lotus Notes developer, the database, not the mail program that it is now, way back when. So shifting, and to your point and to your question of why did I choose to come to IBM, and why would I stay with a global huge partner that at times you can get lost in this massive entity? First and foremost was there is nobody better or bigger than IBM. So being able to rub shoulders with people that are heavily committed to investment in innovation while also delivering for clients, highly compelling, right? IBM being recognized as leaders was always very compelling. But you pick on a really good point of how could I individually make a difference or really make an impact within such a large organization? That's exactly how, right? It's understanding and learning. The security industry is a lifelong journey. It's not I need to go back and retool. It's a on the job, at least in my opinion, constant learning and an evolution and a commitment to learn. learn how the technologies are changing, learning how and we're going to get into this a lot, the landscape is changing about how we address that. And the irony to that is there's no yardstick saying we're done. IBM allows us, and IBM was appealing to me to come in knowing that it wasn't going to be a commitment to just technology that I would bring with my clients. It would be that I would be learning how to integrate with clients, how I would quantify their risk, how I would ensure that we were tangibly making differences in their industries and in their businesses that I started with, and continues to keep me pretty excited to be here.
Absolutely, and I think you've epitomized that statement really well, which is, the only change is the only constant, right? And the only thing that is constant is change in these environments. And when you work within an IBM environment, I think you're always sort of meant to think about what is next. And in that perspective of constantly thinking about what is next, you've obviously been a very close confidant, a very close person to be accessed as a subject matter expert for different companies that do work with IBM. In today's reality, especially in view of the pandemic, we've often been talking about it in different organizations where we're going through hell. And I've always said, if you're going through hell, keep going, because there's something that can come with this. What are some of the new discussions around security that firms are talking to you about? What are some of the things that CISOs are telling you that are keeping them awake at night?
Little did we know a year ago what was on our horizon, right? I mean, I think a year ago there were certainly some inklings of the global pandemic. But to your point, the discussions that we were having a year ago with our CISOs, with our chief data officers, have shifted, right? The catalyst that's occurred with the global pandemic has almost acted like an accelerant, almost a magnifier to challenges that our CISOs were having, our organizations were having. And anywhere there was a crack has been exacerbated. Their supply chain, all of us were all at home. We weren't designed to all work from home. Our supply chain were not designed to work that way. And all of us in the industry recognize that when something isn't designed for an intended purpose, we often then have challenge to say, how do I go retroactively fix it? And retroactively fixing something is so much harder than designing it for the intended purpose in the onset. So a lot of those discussions are around that. The other thing I've really noticed lately, twofold. One is outwardly facing. CISOs are asking, how am I doing relative to my peers? How am I doing relative to others? But then the other one is more internally focused of how do I, as a security information officer, chief data officer, CIO, how do I do this? Knowing full well that I need to be forward leaning. I have to enable the business. This has to be linked to the business's challenges, to quantification of risk to the business. Yeah. But I don't own my budget. I very rarely own my own budget. I very rarely own my own team. I'm now this master of all, purveyor of all. And we're all working from home, right? That SEV1 sprint that we've often talked about in the industry, where the team has to swarm together to address a SEV1, has almost become a daily occurrence. People are on back-to-back phone calls. We're having change windows being crushed. So yeah, the CISO conversation certainly seems to be outwardly, how am I doing to others? But inwardly, we're really in that SEV1 sprint a lot. How do you recommend I accomplish my goals with not owning my budget, with having ecosystems that are external, having partners? It's a real juggle. It's a hard job.
Absolutely. And I think you've raised a very important point here when you brought this up earlier on this aspect of design. And I'm a strong proponent of the idea is that there's always design. It's either good design or bad design. There's no design. And in this new design that we find ourselves in, or this novel design that we find ourselves in, and the way in which industry is delivering services, of course, we've been heavily reliant, ever more so now, on cloud computing. One of the things that we heard a lot at the CISO forum, of which IBM was a sponsor, was on this aspect of CISOs now, or CIOs, CTOs, etc., engaging with IBM, but just engaging in general now about issues around misconfiguration of the cloud environments. And we actually have a question around this, which is asking, has it been around that clouds are not sufficiently, have been either misconfigured or are they just not sufficiently designed for scale? Can you talk to us a little bit about, from a security perspective, what's shifted in IBM's understanding of cloud?
Brilliant question. So the Cloud Threat Landscape report has recently been put out for 2020. And one of the data points that it brought about was that in 2019, over a billion, sorry, not a million, I'm doing an Austin Powers, but 1 billion records were lost due to what the root cause was seen as misconfiguration of cloud environments. And so then it begs the question, as you said, is it misconfiguration or is it misuse?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the desire and a lot of the discussion towards cloud has been shifting of existing applications, onboarding of as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. But now we're into the hard work. A lot of that low-hanging fruit of moving to the cloud has been done, but it has been consumption of cloud as opposed to I need to consume with the configuration and the risk posture, to your point of the security controls being brought in the appropriate way. There was almost a paradigm shift in that as well from our organizations, whereby the acquisition of cloud was brought in a similar way to acquiring an on-prem, where on-prem, with the maturation of on-prem, was already bringing about a number of compensating controls and ensuring the security posture was there. Cloud, based on the initial push to it being fairly financially focused, didn't have that. And a lot of the cloud agreements outright said the data that's brought here is not our responsibility. It remains yours to be a custodian of. And I think a lot of organizations got tripped up on that, hence leading to the misconfiguration of cloud and the realization that the acquisition and the movement to cloud still required a predicating aspect of design on the security on top. So now when we're shifting into the additional workloads for that cloud migration, I'm thrilled that majority of the conversations that we're having now are how to refactor those with security in mind, not a refactoring of workload and then retrofitting of security control on top.
So let's work with that just a little bit. And I thank our audience for tuning in and dropping in questions. Direct message is perfectly fine. Shout out to Team CyberX for making it super simple for me. For those of you who are watching, you'll notice that below on your stream, you're seeing some very interesting data points that are there as well. There are also some links which we'll be sharing on social media after the session. And please keep your questions coming in. Daina, if it's cool with you, I'm going to start stitching in these questions because people are relating to what we're talking about. And this question is to do around, great, you know what, there's obviously, when it comes to cloud, we often say there's no one size fits all solution. And you have to obviously understand context. You've got to understand people, process, and technology, and in that order. But a friend of mine from Waterloo Hydro, Mark Dillon, has always reminded me, perfection is the opposite of done. And when it comes to reconfiguring your cloud, when it comes to ensuring that your cloud is prepared for the new environments that we're in, time is a very essential component that we really need to think about, and speed of change. How has IBM and how have you, looking at the rapid changes that are happening right now on a day-to-day basis, how have you helped your clients with understanding how to secure their cloud environments in lieu of not just the speed of change, but the sheer type of change that we're going through?
Brilliant question. And we could spend a lot of time on this question, Alec, because there's a lot to it. Yeah. First and foremost, I think you hit the nail on. Well, two things that I completely resonate with what you just said is people, process, and technology. Yeah. And in that order. With that in mind, the other one is not one size fits all. Yeah. Right? So to that, IBM spends an awful lot of time working with you to design that. Our design workshops, we've also got our garage capability, wherein we work with you to understand the outcomes that you're looking for and where you are today, as opposed to bringing a solution and trying to bring it onto your organization. We've got the capabilities through our multi-cloud support, hybrid cloud enablement, or direct cloud, private cloud, public cloud. The offerings are not the challenge, but so often in these discussions, we're looking at what is the technical solution and then trying to make that fit how the process and the people and the experience Our businesses are focused on how to enable the experience, whether it be academic, whether it be a financial service, whether it be a manufacturing company. Our experience that our businesses are moving towards with their clients has to be supported by our underlying infrastructure, of which cloud becomes part of. So it's those design thinking workshops, the garage methodology specifically, that enables us to work with that organization and understand their needs, and then tailor the cloud offerings that we've got to them. And also prioritizing. It's a big thing of when we're refactoring workloads, that prioritization of which and when will also drive out what security controls you need to, again, do the security first, that sec DevOps, prior to jumping in, or sorry, to avoid the retrofit secondary activity.
Absolutely. And I think, again, thank you for elocuting it in such a way and really breaking it down systematically. For the audience that's listening, one of the reasons why a lot of companies engage with our friends at IBM is this ability to bring things down to process as well, and having a methodology in place that allows you to break things down. So thank you for doing that. And you've elocuted an important point, which is something that we've spoken about quite a bit, which is cloud computing is not about where you do computing, it's about how you do it. And you've raised those points very clearly here. A question that's come in, which I'll weave in again, and this is around, are you finding that small businesses are having different security challenges on the cloud versus large enterprise? And are you seeing specific differences between what public sector clients are asking you versus private sector?
Oh, yeah, easy answer is yes. Yes to all of that. And breaking down, so difference between SMB or more medium, recognizing that from an IBM perspective, we are primarily focused and primarily interacting with clients at an enterprise level, but do an awful lot of work with our partners, with the medium and the small to medium-sized businesses. The differences are not as drastic as one might think. It's really more along the velocity you mentioned and the speed and agility, but also the uncompromising aspect of security. The large enterprises have got a number of workloads to be refactoring. Certainly from a financial services perspective, it's the epitome of hybrid is required. The security postures, however, usually much more mature on an enterprise scale, right? They've usually got a dedicated team. Their culture is very focused on how do I enable security. When we get working with clients that are far more or less enterprise level, people are wearing multiple hats. And with wearing multiple hats, they can have sometimes competing priorities. And the security aspect is not that it's not recognized. It's maybe just more balanced in so much that they have to make trade-offs. So they're looking for that one-stop shop. They're looking for something that can accomplish their goals, ensure that they're regulatory complying, make sure that their data assets and their PI is safe. And I'm going to use a word that I usually dislike, but just generically say safe. And they're able to procure it in a method that they're not locked into for long term.
Yeah.
Larger enterprises have a bit more flexibility in that, where certainly technology, they're wanting to be more agnostic these days. But more importantly, they're recognizing the processes to integrate it have to be sound across their entire organization, right? We look at some of those stats on the incident response preparedness is the number one highest cost saver, right? So to avoid impact from a breach, the best activity is incident response preparedness. That's where our enterprise clients are really, I find, getting on that path and embracing that as opposed to nodding at it.
Let's continue on this flight that you've taken us down. And this is, you mentioned proactive versus reactive. And you've also been, very clearly, although not saying it directly, is that security is not just about some checklist. It is a dynamic, agile environment, and you constantly have to have your eye on the pulse. Completely understood. Now, one thing that I talk a lot about when I engage with different enterprise or when we engage in different conferences is we talk a lot about the aspect of audits and controls. And perhaps I'm guilty when I say this, but I've silently always been a proponent of the fact that the fewer the moving parts, the better. But I know that especially when you're in a virtual environment, moving parts are multiplying by the second, if not by the millisecond. How does IBM and your role specifically, how do you help with orchestrating security postures, helping them improve their cloud orchestrations, but how do you also improve them to be better prepared from an audit and a control perspective?
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant. And that will always be an aspect, won't it be? That there is at a level of compliance, but compliance doesn't equal your security. Um, but recognizing that compliance is your ante for business. You have to ensure compliance, and compliance is still shifting, is still evolving as our global needs, and certainly our digital charter in Canada coming out will be impacting this further still. Bills in Quebec, bills in Alberta, right? They all have nuances that we need to stay on top of. IBM, again, I come back to that intentional activity and designing for you, knowing the industry and knowing and let's make that analogy, Ali, of taking the suit off of the rack.
Yeah.
It will probably do all right for you, but then we're going to tailor it. And tailoring isn't after you've worn it 3 times. Tailoring it is before you leave the store with it. And it's with a bit of that mindset to compliance, is that we need to make sure that you're meeting all of your compliance requirements for wherever you're going to be doing business. We do that at the onset with design thinking. I said the moving towards what's security appropriate, though, I'm really impressed and I'm really happy to see so many companies looking at understanding their risk from a quantification perspective, as opposed to, before we used to do a lot of CMMI, which is still very valid. It's still very important. A Carnegie Mellon index, right? About, are you a 1 to a 5 maturation level? And the intent behind that being, if we're a 2, we want to move to more of an industry standard, which might be a 3 or a 3.5, depending on your industry. Now, when we're adding in risk quantification, we're able to say to the board, this is the impact to our business, not necessarily a cost avoidance, but this is the business risk that we have should we not ensure that the security posture or the way we're doing business is accomplishing our security goals over and above our ante-in, which is our compliance goals. That's some of the approach that I'm really happy to see the conversation shifting and starting to really embrace that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this, the agility and also the point that you made about the customizations of products before you even deploy them, understanding the products inside
Yeah.
out, vendor management process, so on and so forth, really speaks to the multifaceted, interdisciplinary nature of someone in your position. Let's go to a bit of a higher altitude now, because a couple of questions have come in about what does it mean when you say that someone is leading security intelligence? And how does AI or how does automation factor into this? There's one thing I can tell our audience: there's nothing artificial about Dana's intelligence. She has definitely got some thinking, because this is by far some of the most questions that I've received on the instant message. So thank you so much for all of your questions. And Dana, let's go to this a little bit, which is the aspect of security intelligence. What kind of feedback, what kind of data through your role does IBM provide to consumers, public sector, private sector? Are you able to now share more about where the most threats are coming from? Is it insider threats? Is it ransomware? Tell us a little bit about your intelligence analysis.
So this is a fun topic, right? And again, we could spend an awful lot of time. So I'd be happy to have more conversations about this afterwards too. Security intelligence can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And you've just touched on a bunch of them, Ali, that there's insider intelligence of what is actually occurring in your environment. What are your employees? What are your partners doing on your networks? Often, many of us from a supply chain perspective or an ecosystem to go to market have multiple people, multiple vendors, multiple partners on our networks. We need to have intelligence on how they're using your assets. What are they doing with your data? How they're distributing your data, using your data, storing your data, et cetera. That insider knowledge is it's very unique. It's very custom, but it's also there's a lot of patterns to it. So a lot of what we do within IBM is looking for those patterns, identifying the anomalies, and really ensuring that we're validating back out with the client of, are these patterns recognized? Are they normal? Are they valid? We do that through lots of different technology, but more importantly, it's the approach that we take to recognizing the insider threat and the insider appropriateness. The other aspect of intelligence that we're strongly, and IBM, I think, is certainly a market leader in this area, is the external, of recognizing the exploitation of our networks attributed to certain threat actors or threat behaviors. X-Force Threat Exchange, X-Force IRIS team spend an awful lot of time providing a lot of very open content. A lot of it is intended, as IBM has a commitment to being an open provider, provided out to the market to enable the strength of all of us, right? When we raise all of us, the waterline raises for that security posture. So feel free, please do look on IBM.com under security intelligence and our threat exchange program. There's a lot available there for you. Certainly around a certain exploit that came out just before Christmas that had a lot of us focused on our infrastructure and our use of their product. There's a lot of really good guidance there on how you may see that vulnerability being manifested in your environment, and very specific aspects to be updating on firewalls or your vulnerability management scanning or any of your detection controls that you may have in place. So that's real high level, Ali, of the intelligence that we try to focus in on for our clients at all times.
Interesting. And, we often believe that, different paths will often lead to the same castle. We find lots of intelligence reports that are out there. One of the things, though, that I noticed a great deal with the pattern that when it comes to IBM reports that you get is a heavy focus on quantifiable data and statistics. How do you find that balance between when you analyze, for example, an insider threat? How do you find the balance between providing data that's both quantitative and qualitative? How do you provide the stats and the commentary to go along with that? What's the fine balance that you aim to achieve with your reports?
Yeah, really good point. And I come back to one of the compelling natures of myself personally being with IBM are the number of just really intelligent people that are far more intelligent than I am in looking and innovating to that point, right? Those stats that we're able to pull out are from years of really strong data science and security innovators looking at the data and really truly understanding it to the point that they can quantify it repeatably and consistently. IBM has a very strong background of being predicated in facts.
Yeah.
I know when I run through an incident response or even a security program assessment with my clients, we start with facts. Facts always have to be the guiding light for us, because facts, especially when we have transparency to how the facts were derived, they lead. Right? It's that great equalizer, to your point, Ali. And then the context, you're really right, is the context. We try to give context so that everyone reading can read it and say, I can see myself in that.
Yeah.
Or I can see that and it relates to my business. The challenge is sometimes it can't apply to every business. And that's where we spend a lot of time, and we've got a strong team of security intelligence analysts. And those analysts are doing exactly what you just said, which is we're taking the facts, correlating them against other industries and other facts, but then contextualizing for the client. So the client immediately says, this is for me. You looked with my lens at these facts and the landscape and contextualized it to my risk and my posture. And you are actionably encouraging me to do something. Because that context doesn't always line up to everybody reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that key word at the end, reading it. I think, when you read and you're able to digest all of this data, it really opens up new areas of analysis for you. And I encourage our audience, we've got especially members of our board that are on, I do encourage you to, on social media, pick up some of the links that have been dropped as well. These white papers that have been shared, or these access to different articles, are extremely rich in quantitative data and commentary that well and truly tends to break the borders in many ways. Think outside of the box and burn that box. We've got another 28 minutes left, and I want to shift a little bit to another question that's come in, which I knew was going to come in. And really, there are two pieces to this question. One is around leading your teams, but the other one is around a subject that is very close to my heart after my cats, and that is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, IBM, very well known for making this statement that before we used to tell computers what to do, today We give computers lots of data, and computers give us the response. How, or rather, what is your perspective on automating security controls and the role of AI in cybersecurity in general?
So you're making me laugh with the cat, given the recent video that went viral
Yes,
on a
I
Zoom. So I'm just glad I don't have a
know.
filter on. I don't have to explain that I'm not a cat. Yeah, AI. If you are a few things, AI is a must.
Yeah.
AI is an absolute must. There are different camps, certainly, and different thoughts. My opinion is that AI is a must, and there is no better company right now that enables artificial and ethical artificial intelligence than IBM, because they do it transparently. Again, with the commitment to being IBM open, we are transparently enabling the consistent repeatability of activities to move our security posture forward. There are a number of activities, and I'll just give one. When we're using a threat management program, such as a SIM or a central logging system, for example, there are a number of alerts. A lot of our security organizations are being overrun by alert fatigue. That's something we've been dealing with for a time right now. Alert fatigue, for the most part, is because we are having alerts generated that security operation centers and security operation analysts have to spend time looking at. That old adage of they're spending time on known threats as opposed to being released to work on unknown threats. When they're working through those incidents through our AI and especially some machine learning to understand the repeatability of those activities and recognizing the patterns, we can bring it through predictive modeling. With the predictive modeling, we then have a threshold. With when that threshold is met, they can be auto-closed, auto-escalated, and when they're auto-closed, they transparently provide all of the details of why. Yep. Right? We've learned your environment for a certain threshold. We then make assertions, done, auto-closed. But next, this is where the fun happens, is when it's auto-escalated. Because we've learned your environment, we know who it should be escalated to. And ideally, you've got some AI where you're then able to automate and orchestrate where it goes in your organization, not shifting humans out of the role, shifting that what you've been doing and you've been on autopilot doing, you don't have to do any longer. We bring it out to where we bring that extra value. And the AI aspect, that's just one very, very rudimentary example, but it's one that resonates with a lot of operational teams, that when we're able to automate and use the AI and machine learning to cognitively enrich our programs, we as people in those teams suddenly get pretty excited to not, I'm going to be spending 3/4 of my day on something I probably did last Tuesday or last Thursday. I'm going to be doing something different and something new. So I'm constantly challenged without being overworked. Yeah. I'm getting the information brought to me. So, small example, Ali, but if we're not bringing AI into our security programs to some degree, the question needs to become, why not? Yeah. Why not?
Absolutely. And when we talk a lot about data, and I've said this repeatedly, it's like, yep, you're dealing with oceans and oceans of data, and each drop in and of itself is an ocean in and of itself. There's a lot to be analyzed and a lot to be processed, which begs the question, Daina, around validation. When you've got so much automation in place and you've got threat feeds coming in and annotation happening on top of these threat feeds and dashboards being issued, how do you maintain control? What do you see as the role of human intelligence when it comes to analyzing some of the outputs from your AI? Daina?
Yeah, so there's again, I come back to the facts. Human aspect has to always be there to ensure, in my opinion, the context. And IBM's approach with our security operations center teams, our threat intelligence teams, our forensic response teams is to validate the facts, gather the facts, and then ensure that our responses are absolutely contextualizing back. There's a lot of, one of the greatest things too is there's a lot of collaboration. It's not just one individual doing something. The collaboration enables us to validate against other products, validate out against other projects, to ensure that the information that we're bringing forward and the information that we're recommending is IBM Blue Standard. right? It's not a we think this is what has gone on. It's empirical or tangible evidence based to then the human factor. And I can't underestimate or underemphasize, that's probably a better way to say it, the human aspect, right? We still are. We're fallible. We are, but we're not linear.
Yeah.
We have the ability to learn on the spot as opposed to learning and falling into the same pothole 20 times before our machine learning learns that was the wrong way to go.
Absolutely. And you know what? I do agree with you. Often you've heard of that saying, and I've said it many times, AI is the rocket, data is the fuel. Fuel can come in different types. And if the fuel is not properly refined, it can cause us to plummet into some pretty dangerous spaces. But enough of that. I want to just dig into this a little bit more. And this is on the aspect of the types of situations that you're now finding yourselves in. Now, let's take an example. Whether you've got these controls run by AI, you've got other forms of monitoring that are in place, one of the things we're seeing a lot about right now is the realities around data breaches. And one of the aspects that AI brings to the table is the speed and velocity at which something can be flagged. What are you seeing that's now changing in the world of data movement and data breaches? And has the pandemic, in any particular way, staying true to a question that's come in, has the pandemic increased the amount of reports we're getting on data breaches? And your thoughts, Dana?
Yeah. Good question. The easy answer is yes. There are more discussions on data breaches. I do find majority of our client conversations start with, I'm noticing more
Yep.
in the news. I also think it's natural. In a lot of ways, I do think it's natural in so much that one, we were already shifting majority of our workloads to a cloud environment. To your point of the unconnected island is a thing of the past,
Yeah.
right? The increase in IoT and the increase in OT attacks, I think we gave you a few stats on those, are certainly very telling of the significant increase. So the number of breaches being on people's minds, the reality also that we're all at home, or most of us still are, we're all on these a little bit more. We are shifting how we are accessing. We're all on WebEx a little bit more. The number of breaches have become also more monetized. The availability to monetize a DDoS attack is now unfortunately at the click of a few buttons. It was a few more buttons, a few more clicks a few years ago. It's all the more easy right now. The availability to move onto a pastebin site and grab some credentials to test them. Previously, pastebin sites, while appealing, very rarely had valid information, right? The user IDs and passwords being sold were usually out of date. Now they're not. There are a number that are very quickly moving from acquisition onto that availability of being sold, and they're having active buyers. So there's an element there that we are seeing an increase in availability, an increase in attack. The inverse, because I do like to be more positive on this stuff as well, is that the threat is not going away. The threat is being exacerbated. The threat is being encouraged. Our governments are shifting, digital charter being one of them, to really enable our businesses to be taking this seriously and to be putting in the proper safeguards for us as citizens, as well as the businesses themselves as part of our economy, but also the way we are approaching. There are so many more alliances now, and that consolidation of technology to enable us to be finding these approaches. I would say we're getting a lot better, in my own personal opinion, on how we're addressing the additional threats right now, Ali.
Absolutely. And, just to our audience, besides the links that you'll see on the Cyber Exchange platform, besides the social media stuff that you will see, I do recommend, if you have the time, to go to the on-demand section in CISO Forum 2020. I apologize, I don't remember the speaker, but I was on the board of that conference. And I remember a keynote from IBM where a statement was made where it said, there's no AI without IA. There's no artificial intelligence without information architecture. And understanding information architecture, I feel like today we've unpacked that even further. We have another 15 minutes or so to go, and Dana, quite a few questions have come in. And again, I'll do my best to sort of take them along as we journey through towards our end. Dana, this is a question which relates to the structure of your teams and your leadership style. Someone who's as accomplished as you are, you've obviously got multiple team members within your organization, multiple team members that do different things for you. For someone like yourself, it's probably not about how can I avoid people stealing my ideas, but it's more about how can I take them to actually take my ideas and do something with it. What's your philosophy when you lead security intelligence teams? What are some of the top priorities that you've set for them right now? And how is that charting the way IBM is gathering intelligence around security issues?
Right, right. So from a leadership style, I think you've raised a good point wherein there has been at times there's a belief of the more I know, the more valuable I am. Um, Security intelligence and enabling security programs with our clients is how the dissemination of information is curated for our clients for a need. That curation is hopefully prevalent. You'd have to ask folks I work with, but in my style of sharing, open,
Yeah.
transparent, and the reason why is, and this is bludgeoning on a different topic that comes up at the beginning of March of the International Week of Women, is the diversity and that inclusivity is within our networks. And you mentioned information architecture and data architecture. All of our environments, and it includes our teams, are bettered when we are a rich tapestry and the perspectives of different individuals, different cultures, different assets, different control mechanisms are brought together. That bringing everything into a melting pot and then curating it towards a business objective or that client challenge has been always my philosophy towards approaching cybersecurity and encouraging the cyber program evolution for our clients. The enablement of everybody's voice and everybody's perspective needs to be there, right? It can't be we all look at a security intelligence from one idea and one aspect, and we just simply look for information that validates that. We look for ways we think it is X, but we need to empirically understand, is that valid? And we test it out. And by testing it out and validating it, you then have confidence when talking externally to say, we've looked at this all the different ways that we can. We have looked to see if alternate root causes might be in play, and then we bring that wholesome picture there. It does a few things, right? Is it enables that confidence that we are, again, focusing on facts. Absolutely. And making sure that the right content is getting there. So leadership of open and collaboration.
And I think that really, really structures the way the kind of reports that you see, the kind of services that are delivered as well, and the people piece when we talk about cybersecurity. When we reflect on your leadership style, when we look at, the types of approaches that you're taking, the types of conversations that you're hearing from C-suite executives, from CISOs, from security technologists across different sectors, and we've got a good sense of your approach towards technology, ultimately, we have to look into this question, and I'll rephrase it a little bit, which is on the aspect of understanding costs. Now, I don't want to delve into the cost of procuring an IBM service, but I want to delve into the aspect which you brought up early in the conversation around budgets. I've often said this to some of my clients or some of the folks that I've engaged with, is that if you think it's expensive to do something, you're going to find it completely unaffordable if you do nothing. How do you explain, or how do you engage the community in terms of understanding the cost of a breach, the cost of a particular threat? How do you tackle that question?
Yeah, really good point. And I'm so happy that in the last few years, it's really become very prevalent, the cost of breach reports. There are a number of really good, and I think you've got links to them in here, assets and information sources that are coming out to really allow those CISOs or people moving up into those roles, or just people shifting their architectural activities to understand those costs. First and foremost, the fair risk analysis model that we use through our risk quantification approach with IBM, I mentioned a little bit earlier, really mapping to your financial systems and your expected. But then on the inverse is also reinforcing, and we've been seeing more adoption to, is that reliance, as you mentioned, is what is your incident response approach? You don't figure out how you'd get out of a burning building when the fire's already started. There's a reason why we all still have fire escape tests, right? And the fire alarms go off and we test it. And people say, we all know how to get out of a building. We've been at this since we were little kids, if not before. the reason why is because it's important to constantly remind ourselves how to do it, and getting that thought process brought into our businesses to recognize that it's not an if, right? It's a when. So test what would happen. And when you balance that against an understanding of what the risk quantification in your business is, suddenly you have an audience who's engaged. And an engaged audience then says, okay, I need to consolidate some of my IT. That's one of the biggest things that majority have. A lot of the consolidation is occurring in the market. The other thing is we need to invest in our governance. Okay, what does that mean? What process? What people? Do I want to hire people? Do I want to partner? You need the capacity, but how do you fulfill that?
Yep.
And that again becomes that conversation with the CISO, who has to be a masterful social networker of gaining agreement on how best to bring out tooling, but integrate them with others and ensure that the people managing them and the organizations managing them are doing it in the way that enable their experience that they need for their clients and their businesses. The cost comes only, or the cost discussion, I find, only comes when we've been able to really ensure that they have an understanding of that risk element in their business, and that the instant response occurrence needs to be all understood in the org.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely important also for folks to understand the time of engagement as well. I think from an IBM perspective, what we've understood today is whether you're engaged at the very beginning of a particular project or the very inception of a company's cybersecurity planning, or somewhere in between, you have a very particular philosophy when it comes to incident response and incident management. What is your take on, when it comes to incident response, what is your approach towards it? Do you often look at doing reconnaissance primarily, or do you always look at, let's stop the bleeding for now and then go back? What's your philosophy on incident response?
So my philosophy is certainly the containment first. First and foremost is the containment. Within the containment, depending on the organizational structure, depending on the forensic activity required, you can often start, to your point, starting to do the reconnaissance at the same time. Unfortunately, more often than not, though, that can't happen in reality because of the operational drain. I spoke earlier about SEB1 sprint that we all move into. In a forensic or a containment situation, we're in that SEB1 sprint, depending on how broad that situation may be and the number of teams involved for the assets involved. We may have to be spinning up new environments to enable business to continue. Right? The last thing we want in a situation is that businesses can't take orders, fulfill orders, conduct business. So more often than not, unfortunately, Ali, the reconnaissance aspect does happen after containment, if not ensuring that business has resumed, and then reconnaissance. The philosophy I have is just make sure it does get done. The worst thing that happens is we get containment and we get business back up and running, and then we say, we'll get to the reconnaissance later. Yeah. We'll get to the root cause of why. And we don't. And we all know when we don't learn from it,
to repeat itself. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. If we don't learn from our history, we are condemned to repeat it. I would agree with you 100%. Daina, thank you so much. You've gone through not just information technology, operational technology as well. You've looked at automation and controls. You've looked at what are some top priorities or conversations with CISOs and C-suite executives in security. And you've unpacked cloud and incident response and team management for us in the space of 52 minutes. So thank you so much for being a true champion as we go through this. We're coming very close to our final few minutes, and I want to take us to a bit of a smooth landing and get to know a little bit more about you. One of the things that I've noticed when I work in different teams is you'll have one set that says the glass is half full, another set that says it's half empty, and then there's someone like a Daina that says, we look at the glass and it's about 2 times bigger than what it needs to be. Let's think about what's next. What are some of the new priorities that you see that will be coming up for you as a security intelligence leader?
We only have 10 minutes, right? So, yeah, a few key things, right, is enabling our mobile workforce without the security challenges that we're currently seeing right now. The reality of where we're working is an area that I do want to continue to dive down into, and ensuring that us as individuals, as citizens and employees of businesses are able to maintain our personal security within the security of our organizations. That's one key area that we're diving into, and I personally have on my roadmap for my own personal learning on how best to be accomplishing that within, right? Not on top of, not instead of, but within the overarching. The other one as well is that workload, unpacking, as you mentioned, the workload migration to cloud and the best enablement of that. A lot of our design workshops that we've been holding are pulling out a lot of trends. I'd like to validate those trends out to really understand if they are indeed best practices, or if it's just a endemic side of where we happen to be right now. So I've got some approach to that. The last, but not certainly the least one on there, is the point that security intelligence of understanding the motivation. Usually it's a very financial motivation, but there are some additional motivations that are occurring right now within the global landscape, and understanding how those motivations outside of financial gain might be changing how our organizations could be impacted, or worse yet, used as a mule, used as a vector to pass on additional or to inflict even further impact on others. So some of those are three areas that I'm working on and looking forward to learning more as the year proceeds.
Fantastic. And I think, again, one of the key things that you've highlighted is not just the ability to know what you don't know, but also to reflect on your blind spots. And, you said this very well at the beginning, which is, there's never a completion in this. They're just different markers, and you continue your process and progress from there. But from a testing perspective and trying out new tools and technologies, one of my philosophies that's often got me into trouble is it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And I know that's not necessarily something that I want everybody to adhere to, but are you going to be trying out, or are you thinking about trying new techniques or tools? And if so, what are the kind of sandbox environments that you set up for your teams?
So the sandboxing activities are pretty stellar in so much that we, as IBM, have a number of security software teams under our same roof, right? So as practitioners, we have the luxury of our colleagues sitting next door having those sandboxes that you're talking to. So I have the luxury of being able to say, which one do we get to use and which one do we get to play in, as opposed to which one do we need. So I do recognize and very grateful for that capability. A few things in there that are really exciting is because of the multi-hybrid engagement and a lot of the consolidation in the market. A lot of the cloud providers, as one example, are providing what they're calling central logging systems. I don't know if I'd go so far as saying that they're a SIM, but they are central logging, and they provide an element of alerting. The question then becomes, is the pragmatic approach on which one to be using, when, and how. Right? We've got egress costs for organizations. We've got the data cohesiveness in the environment. So some of our approaches are building some of that environment and better understanding what is the data fidelity impact within the different cloud environments and these different central logging systems or bludgeoning SIMs relative to a more mature of a Splunk or a QRadar or example. So that's just one area that we're focusing in on, and we're using our existing capabilities with IBM to be sandboxing and understanding so that we can then bring that to our clients either through offering management or specifically as a bespoke to them on how best to be using these multi-cloud environments and the gift with purchase SIMs that come with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our audience, I highly recommend checking out some of the links again, because you do have access to some free resources as well that you can utilize. I know, for example, many of you who have tuned in and have a data analytics background and are interested in dashboarding. We had one question come in around some innovations around syslogs and how we could use some dashboarding techniques, etc., to visualize what we're seeing in the marketplace or what we're seeing in our particular networks. Sandbox environments that you may have access to from IBM are a great place to get started. And again, I do recommend, if you can check out some of the on-demands. I do remember Cyber Exchange 2.0. One of the closing sessions, we had a gentleman from IBM speak very eloquently about the different ways in which you can do testing and the different ways to shake the ground on pen testing the way we think about it. Lots of resources to go to. Now, I know that there were a lot of questions that came in, Daina. Just so you're aware, Some questions came in on identity access management, specifically digital IDs as it applies to new travel patterns in the world. Another question had also come in around what are you seeing from an intelligence perspective in terms of language of hackers and the social morphology of some of the hackers or some of the evil actors, so to speak. And these are all questions, Daina, I would love to get into. And I do promise you that if we can schedule another session, we certainly will. We're coming very, very close to our tail end. And I have to ask you this question, especially in lieu of all the lockdowns that we're in. A book is a great way to travel without even moving an inch. Daina, you're a fascinating individual. What's one book that resonates a great deal with you?
So you can see from my background that there are a number of books, and I love how you say a book can take you anywhere, even though we're not currently traveling right now. Lots of books, but if I have to think of one, The Climb of the Cave Bear. And the funny thing is it's a children's book, and I read it before I started high school, so it was a few moons ago that I did read it. But the reason why I often think that that's one of my favorites is because my mind goes back to it periodically. And I think the premise of the book is it's set in prehistoric and it's Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon period, where a small child, a 5-year-old, is the lone survivor out of an earthquake. And it's all, the premise is their journey on how to survive. And what often comes back in my mind is the courageous pursuit to understand. It was actually written by a PhD of history, so it's actually very historically accurate. So if you're interested, it's great that way. But it's written for children, so it was a great book going into high school, where I then made choices to go into computer science, which led me into my career. That courageous pursuit of understanding things that I don't right now is what I take out of that book, and it had some fun stories around it. So yeah, that was one book that I've always enjoyed.
Daina, when it's you referenced that it was a children's book, you know what? I can even go back to my grade 5 days studying in the UK system. One of the books that resonated with me back in the days was actually Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And I could do a separate power hour altogether on why Pride and Prejudice was that important to me, and has something or two to talk to when it comes to cybersecurity as well, especially when it comes to social engineering. But that's a subject for another day. Daina, I would love to extend this power hour by another multiple number of hours, but I know you have other places to be, and sometimes I tend to have other work to do as well. But Daina, this has been a fascinating exchange. I'm going to ask you to stay on so you and I can have 30 seconds in the green room. But before I bid you adieu, I'm going to tell our audience that I really hope that today's session has not only got you to see the people behind the fascinating technology at IBM, but it's also got you a little bit of a reminder that the secret to success is that there are no secrets. Daina has been an open book and shared quite a lot with you about not just her technical understanding of security, but the social piece of security as well, the psychological element of security, and the true interdisciplinary nature of security. There's one thing I learned from Daina today. It's, leaders don't just tell their teams, here, go and do it. They simply tell them, let's go and get this done together. And together with her team, she and IBM have really, really helped not just businesses on their own, but the Canadian context became a lot more smarter and a lot more secure in cybersecurity. With that, I'm going to thank Daina for her time. I'm going to see her in the green room. And to our audience, I'll see you at the next Power Hour, which is tomorrow. And then a couple of other Power Hours across the month of February, including one with Eric O'Neill. And I'm sure all of you know, the author of Grade 8. Daina, thank you so much for your time today. I'll see you in the green room. Take care and stay well.
Okay.